This is addressed to the principle of self-directed care, which seems to be the model now of a person having their own autonomy in their needs and not being directed by an organisation. I think that the idea of the social model has been very slow to come into being with the major organisation in Ireland. I would like to see the immediate effect and the immediate implementation of the social model, a directive social model in every county in Ireland, which means that people with a disability, an acquired illness or a neurodegenerative disorder can actually say what they need and not be told certain things. Having an acquired neurodegenerative disorder has been a steep learning curve. It has been one of the most disabling psychological adjustments that I've ever had to make in my life. And I believe I could have done very, very well with this adjustment if someone had met me halfway and seen me as an individual and as a person in my own right. I have not yet met that within the context of the chief healthcare provider in Ireland, which is the HSE. I know that that is a personal agenda, but I also know that it's there for a lot of other people. The idea that I'm not a human being has more or less made me feel, well, how do you get across to them that you're a human being, that I'm an intelligent human being? I don't think the social model, it was supposed to be started, we had this idea of social model Disability Act 2005, is not being grasped. I mean, it's all in theory. It is true that if you have a care team meeting and you're talking about your needs, and you're saying what your needs are, you're pretty much met with a bureaucratic organisation who really, to my mind, has not got my interest at heart. And I'm sorry, but I'm saying this because I know there's a HSE manager in this building today. The managers have gone through me with a knife. I want the social model first to be implemented, because that is the basis where everything else leads. And I'm not a young woman, and I'm too old to be battered by HSE.
Okay. Thanks, Anne. Is there any other people with comments or questions to make? This man here.
Hi, I'd like to ask a question to Sheila. What's your feeling for the willingness and ability of other HSE regional areas to be as leader as you have been in adopting this new model?
I understand that there are a number of initiatives around the country, and under VFM we will be required to work towards that model, and that working group that I mentioned, working group 1 under the VFM, will be looking at those models, and there will be a drive around that for demonstrating, and will they work, and evaluating them, of course, So I would say under VFM there will be a migration towards that type of service delivery. It's very active at the moment, and there's a lot of work going into those working groups at the moment. I mean, they're monthly meetings, and there's work to be done in between times. It's professional project management around it, and there's built-in milestones, and so work has to be done, and there's pressure on people within the HSE to move on VFM.
And just in terms of the point Anne was making in terms of the social model of disability and how embedded or not it is in the HSE, do you have any comments on that?
I don't actually, but I do hear you.
I think it's a difficult position to put Sheila in to respond directly to your question, Anne. I'm not sure if Mark.
I could.
Yeah, I think your point's incredibly articulately made and heard, and Mark is going to respond.
I think the difficulty that the HSE and encounters in a way is where people have maybe multiple conditions and problems, and I think that because that be something that I witness, I suppose, in a day-to-day, and particularly knowing Anne myself, that where there are layers of difficulty, the HSE struggles to know how to do it. And one of the things that's needed is, in the assessment tool that Sheila was talking about, it has to be absolutely holistic for those people who require it.
Okay, and I think Martin wanted to come in here.
Yeah, and just to say, well, it's been our experience anyway, like not just in Dublin North. I mean, we have a lot HSE support in Galway, in Limerick, and Sligo and Donegal, and one or two other spots around as well. And I mean, they're genuine, they're interested, they want to see this. It's they all agree that it's not a perfect solution, but they want to examine how it might best happen. And it's also up to us. We'll be talking later on, I think, about how much work we have to put into it.
Okay, thanks. Margaret here, and are there any other questions in the hall, or rumbling tummies making the call? Okay, Margaret.
I mean, I really love the idea of direct payment, but there are always going to be people who can't actually manage, say, setting up a company or setting up an the framework to enable them to engage in this process. So what sort of alternative package would be available for them so that they could feel that they have some control? I mean, I like the phrase that you use about, power over, and I think that's something that we have to start looking at, that people want power and they want their own power. And if you're not able to get engaged in direct payment so that you can get that power back, how do you? Because we're going to be left with an organisation, certainly in my county where I live, where we don't have power over ourselves and our individual care packages and needs and disabilities. So what about those of us who can't actually perhaps manage such a system?
Okay, maybe Madeline is given Genia's experience with other projects as well.
Yeah, I'll just mention two other projects briefly. I'm just interested in Sheila's comments earlier on as well. One of the projects I'm going to mention is actually a project for people with physical and sensory disabilities in the Northwest. And it's a project that successfully applied for innovation funding from Genio. And it's a HSE-run project. So it's important to begin to realise that it's not just non-HSE providers that are starting to facilitate this kind of approach. Now, it is quite a unique project, but that involves a brokerage system. So it doesn't involve people having to set up their own companies, having to become familiar with all the process around that, but it does give people control over their bit of resource, or their jam jar of resource, if you like. And the project helps to work between the person with the disability and their family and the service providers to get what's the best use of that and give them as much choice and control. There's another similar project run by DARA, which again, that's in the intellectual disability area, the same kind of brokerage model, where we're providing some grant funding to that agency, who are acting as a broker between services. I would just say that, there are some concerns expressed over the idea of handing people money directly. Some of those concerns are based on quite patronising ideologies. Some of them are based on realistic worries, particularly where capacity is an issue, that families may end up receiving funding. And you can end up with, and has happened in some other jurisdictions where people have tried this without safeguards, where, you might have a great extension on the house, but the person with the disability is still sitting in the back bedroom. So there do need to be safeguards where people's own interests are at stake. But there are other ways of doing it that are already being tried in the country to give control over the resource without having to go to the trouble of setting up a company.
And probably some of that stuff would be on your website, Madeline,
all
wouldn't
the
it?
projects that are funded are all listed in terms of their funding and exactly what they're being funded to do. So you'll see those descriptions on the website in Genio, and then you can contact those directly if you want to learn more about how they're working.
And Pat's keen to come in.
Just my son, and for my own son who's 34, we're working with the second organisation that Madeline is funding in that regard, and we're getting great support from them in terms of organising his decoupling of his money from the local service provider. But we're finding it, I think it comes back to an earlier point that was made, that it's not a uniform approach that has been adopted all over the country, and certainly where I'm living we are finding great resistance from the HSE to properly engage with us in having this getting this money for my son so that he can operate as independent a life as possible. He has great level of independence, but he could be doing with a lot more. He hasn't availed of the services of a particular service provider for the better part of 7 years now, and yet they are still getting the funding for him, and they won't release it, and the HSE are not working with us, in my view, in a meaningful fashion to enable that to happen. So there are different areas working in different fashions in that regard.
Thanks, Pat.
Become more uniform.
In time.
Well, one of the points of the new structures, another set of structures that the HSE have currently put in place, which are these new community health organisations, and one of the reasons for them being set up is to have consistency across the country. Now, we heard that in 2005 when the HSE was established, but I think people feel that the new model proposed is a better way of doing it. And also, sometimes actually there's a wisdom to it not being consistent if you live in one of the areas that does well, I guess you do. But any other questions? Because we're really business.
Surely there should be some sort of database being put together so that when you do come across certain regions where there's you can't negotiate with your HSE, surely that information should be out there so that if there is certain areas like North Dublin who seem to be very strong, that they could mentor the managers in the areas that aren't participating. Is the DFI or AT going to get a database together?
It could be like the irishhealth.com rate my hospital. Anyway.
What we're good at doing in the background, without any superstructures or anything like that, we say talk to Sheila in North Dublin, or when we're in the West, we say talk to Mary O'Donnell, or depending on the different, and people do. And we ask them to actually check us out before we come back to talk again.
But the problem with that, Martin, is that if people don't know to ask you, then there's an inequality in that. And the point's been made is that it should be, people have a right to that.
I agree with you, but I was just answering what work are we doing? Yeah, we are doing it. I think even here today, I think it's fair to say there's a lot of people here today from HSE and so forth from right across the country. So in that sense, we are sharing and people are linking in. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, if there aren't any major hands wagging, there isn't. It's 11 minutes past 1 and we were meant to finish at 10 past, so we've done really well. I really want to thank the panel for, despite me whipping them into line, them more or less keeping to time, and for their inputs, and for you too for your inputs.